Now I'd like to invite to the stage our next guest, Virginia Hamilton. Virginia serves as the Regional Administrator for U.S. Department of Labor and Training Administration, Region 6. The region covers 8 western states, including Hawaii, Alaska, and the 4 Pacific territories. Virginia has over 30 years of experience in workforce development at the state and local level, and I'm so pleased that the government chose someone that is so passionate about this work and actually has hands-on experience doing it. So please thank her. She also has been facilitating the TAC grant, so that gets a second round of applause.
Good morning. Well, I know you wanted Secretary Perez here, and you got me. But I do want to thank you on behalf of the U.S. Department of Labor and Secretary Perez. As I think many of you know, the Department of Labor is very committed to the community college system. We have invested $2 billion in our TAC grants. How many of you have TAC grants in your colleges? Wow. Okay. Get to work. And as you know, our focus is not only on skill building, but in getting people jobs. I'm going to spend a little bit of time today talking about your work in a larger context, spending a few minutes talking about what the Department of Labor is up to, and ending with a couple of stories. First, I would say that we're very, very interested in strategic alignment of our resources. We do give out a lot of money. I'm in the good part of the Department of Labor. Some parts of the Department of Labor go out and tell employers their workplaces aren't safe or they're not paying wages. We get to go out and give people money and then make sure that it's really aligned in communities. We invest a lot of money in the workforce development system, in workforce investment boards throughout the country, as well as in nonprofits and local governments who are running very specific programs for ex-offenders, for migrant seasonal farm workers, for foster youth, for veterans, and other target populations. And we're really interested in trying to make sure that those investments are all aligned across communities and regions around the country. We're trying to build an infrastructure that will help make your work a little bit easier. In some of your states, there is something called the Self-Employment Assistance Program for the unemployment insurance. In unemployment insurance, as you know, I think, if you are looking for work, we give you unemployment insurance. In 6 or 7 states, we have the SCA program, which allows people who are studying to start their own businesses the ability to continue to get their unemployment insurance. And we're hoping to grow that program across the country. And we have funded a number of particular projects across the country that are focused on entrepreneurship. We have a workforce investment fund investment in Virginia. Anybody here from that program? $8.3 million, in which we want adults and dislocated workers and veterans to get training and to help start their own business. We have invested in a number of entrepreneurial programs, GATE programs, over the last 4 years, and are in the process of doing evaluation on those. And the Kauffman Foundation actually is working in Washington with our American Job Centers to do entrepreneurial training there. Embedded in all of these projects are evaluations. We have found over the years that we have lots of great stories about how our programs work, but we're really also interested now in understanding which practices work better than others, and we're starting to develop a set of evidence-based practices against which we will determine how we're going to be spending and investing our money in the future. So the Department of Labor, we have 2 things right now that are keeping us up at night. One is, for many of you may know, that the President in July signed the reauthorization of the Workforce Investment Act. That's 11 years in the making, and I don't know why we've been waiting for 11 years, but now all of a sudden it became really urgent and really fast. We have to implement by July of 2015. And so we are in the process of madly writing regulations that will go out in draft in January. And there's some things that you can do in regard to that regulation writing that will help in the work that you can do. and I'll talk about that in a minute. The Vice President also has just issued what's called the Job-Driven Agenda, and the President tasked the Vice President in January to review all of the workforce programs funded by all of the federal agencies. We tend to think that workforce programs are largely housed in the Department of Education and the Department of Labor, and there are many there, but there are also workforce programs in the Department of Transportation, in HUD, in the Department of Energy, in HHS, in the Department of Agriculture. There are about 17 different programs throughout various different federal agencies, all of which fund skill development and the acquisition of jobs. And so there are 7 principles in this job-driven agenda against which the Department of Labor, Education, and all of the cabinet secretaries will be reviewing future investments. And these principles are, for you, nothing new. 1, engaging employers. How do we actually talk to employers, understand what their skill needs are, and build our programs out so that there'll be a job for people when they finish their coursework? Earn and learn. How do we create opportunities? There are a lot of people who are unemployed, who are learning new skills, who can't afford to spend 2 years going to college. They need to get to work right away. So the President has asked for the doubling of the number of apprentices in the next 4 years. And we are very aggressively looking at other kinds of work-based learning strategies that I think are familiar to many of you: internships, on-the-job training, other ways for young people going into summer jobs, ways that people can get real-life experience, and particularly for those who are wanting to become entrepreneurs, going to work in the field in which they're interested to see what they can learn and getting some real-life experience. So engaging employers, earn and learn, making smart choices, using labor market information to understand both the supply in a community and the demand in a community, and starting to really think through in community colleges for those CTE programs how to connect people into where industry and sectors are going. A huge emphasis on career pathways and on focusing workforce development around industry sector strategies. Measuring matters, trying to figure out how to measure things well. And I know one of the barriers for many colleges in working with the public workforce system, in particular around entrepreneurship, is that if you, the workforce system counts how many people get jobs, and starting your own business has not traditionally been counted as getting someone a job. And so one of the ways that you can weigh in the regulation writing process right now, not right this very minute, don't get out your BlackBerry right now or iPhone, but soon, is to make sure that the department defines employment as starting your own business as well as going into a traditional job placement. That will help you be able to leverage your resources with the public workforce system in better ways, because starting a new business will count in terms of placement. Building stepping stones. I think this is something, again, that most of you are familiar with. We are trying to figure out how to build articulated career pathways, articulated courses, stackable credentials. I know in my home state of California, there's a lot of frustration that people can get a credential in the healthcare field, for example, and then want to go to the next step and have to start all over again if they go to a different college or if they're in a different community. Trying to figure out how to articulate credentials and allow people to step sort of up through their profession without having to go back and start over again. The 6th principle is opening doors, and this is really about access for people who otherwise wouldn't have access. I talked to some community college presidents and deans last night, and in many community colleges across the country, the 85% of the people coming into the college need remediation. they can't go right into college-level classes. I know in Los Angeles, at some of the colleges down there, it's 90-95%. So we have to try to figure out how to build remediation into contextualized CTE, things you know you're already working on, but this is something that we're going to be looking at as we look at evaluating job training programs. How many programs provide access to the kinds of people who traditionally have not been able to get into these kinds of programs? And I know I was talking last night, maybe it was to KM, I'm not sure, but about programs for ex-offenders starting their own businesses. Young people, we have a workforce investment board in Northern California that runs a boot camp for youth around entrepreneurship every summer. So thinking about new ways of providing access to our workers, including making sure that we're working with the business community to change business practices to get more access for people into the world of work. There are many employers who will admit, maybe behind closed doors, that some of their hiring practices are maybe out of date. That, for example, they might say, we need a BA, when in fact, maybe they really don't need a BA. Maybe they need an AA. Maybe they need a credential or a certificate. Maybe they need a set of competencies. So if we're going to gain access to disenfranchised populations, we need to figure out how to work with the business community to help them see where their hiring practices are standing in the way of full access. And last, the job-driven agenda is very focused on regional partnerships. How can we work together across our agencies and across a region in developing a strategic strategy for that labor market that doesn't have 15 different agencies all going to the same employer and saying, hire my people, hire my students are great, hire my veterans, hire my youth. How do we create a strategy in which we're all working together to see what the talents are in a region, understanding where the sectors are that are growing the economy, and then working together to make that work. So all of those principles in the job-driven agenda are reflected in the new Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. There are still workforce investment boards that are business-driven. The workforce boards are given a larger role as a convener and a broker of services, not an operator of services. There's much more flexibility built into the American Job Centers or the career centers, and there's an expectation for way more partnerships. There's going to be a requirement for partnerships with the adult ed system, the vocational rehabilitation system, and the TANF population, as well as a requirement that a community college president or other representative of higher education sit on a local board. So the job-driven agenda, and not coincidentally, and the new Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act are really hand in hand the policy framework that the Department of Labor is moving forward with as we look at how to invest our resources in communities. And all of this, I think, relates to your work in a couple of different ways. Someone just mentioned, most of the job growth in the United States is in small business. There's a new book that some of you may have seen called Entrepreneurial Strength Finders. It's written by Gallup, Jim Clifton, and actually Sangeeta, who's a friend of mine, who wrote me about a month ago and said, I just wrote a book. And I went, I'm just going to a conference about entrepreneurship. And just a couple things out of this book, one which I think are just so germane for what we're talking about here. Jim Clifton said, the real problem is not that there isn't enough innovation, it's that there are not enough entrepreneurs starting new businesses. And he goes on to say, and here's why. Entrepreneurship is not systematically built into our culture the way innovation or intellectual development is. You might say, well, I see a lot of entrepreneurial activity in our country. Yes, that's true. But entrepreneurship is now in decline for the first time since the U.S. government started measuring it, and we're not building the skills of our workers. So your work is critically important, I think, not only for building entrepreneurs who are going to go off and start their own business, but also for, I think as many of you have built into your curriculum, entrepreneurial thinking within companies. I was up in Seattle a couple of weeks ago with a bunch of community colleges and employers, and the HR representative for Boeing said, I get engineers coming out of college, and they can do engineering, but they have no idea how to talk to the salespeople, to the marketing people, to the finance people. I need someone who sees systems, who can see all of the pieces of an organization and not just their own little slice. To me, that's entrepreneurial thinking. Someone who's an entrepreneur needs to understand the various different domains of the business. I also talked to a woman there who runs a program in a community college for information technology, and she said she was having a very hard time understanding the needs of the business community because the skills kept changing, the languages kept changing. She couldn't figure out how to keep up, and she knew that if her students could really understand this, there were plenty of jobs out there. So she said she started looking online at meetups and where coders and hackers were going to code and hack. And she said, we just started infiltrating these groups. And she would send students out to the meetups. She sent some of her teachers out, and they started building relationships with some of these, mostly young men, unfortunately, we'll change that, who not only could give clues about what was going on in the industry, but in some cases were starting their own businesses. And then she started thinking, okay, so what could she contribute to this? Well, she has classrooms. These people were meeting in noisy restaurants and in parks, and just come on to the campus, you can use our classroom. And pretty soon she had a very robust relationship with a whole bunch of people who are in the IT sector, some of whom then started to come teach in her classroom. So I thought that was a great example, not only of really understanding, figuring out how to engage with employers better, but also as a college being really entrepreneurial about how to better serve the needs of her students. And the last story I'll tell, again, I think in the job-driven agenda, we talk about understanding labor market information and making smart choices. One of the workforce directors in Northern California, in very rural areas that had virtually no jobs, commissioned an economic study to look at where the tax receipts were coming from in his counties. He had 12 counties, and discovered that something like 3-to-1, the capital, the income coming into those 11 counties were coming from single proprietors, people who were filing 1099s. They were self-employed, and the rest, and that money was 3-to-1 than what was coming in from the business community, mostly small businesses. So he was trying to figure out how to target his economic development resources and realized that they were really sort of the stratified set of 2 different places where he could intervene and really help businesses grow. One was in very small businesses under 5 people, where he could use, he worked with the Small Business Development Center, and he had some other foundation money to go in and really work with businesses who were at about 3 to 4 employees to try to help them grow more. And that was traditional, building a business plan, understanding finances, and so on. But then he also did a campaign in which he outreached to all of those people in these 11 counties who were essentially running their own businesses out of their own house without employees. Some of them said, hey, the reason I'm doing this is because I don't want staff. But there were a lot of people who said, yeah, if I understood better how to run a business, I'd love to grow. I'd love to grow this. And so he was able to target some skills training and business development for those kinds of employees as well. So understanding his labor market, understanding the assets in his community, and growing it. With that, I'm going to end. I'm delighted to be here. The Department of Labor applauds the work that you're doing. Whatever we can do to help, We don't have any more TACT money, but we're looking at other ways that we can invest in community colleges over the next few years. You're doing fabulous work. I thank you for that.